Dave in Chicago. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Okay, just a few comments, and I hope I can finish them all. But I worked in law enforcement for 16-plus years before I left, okay? And I worked in a community just similar to Ferguson. It was about 30,000 residents instead of 20,000, and it was about 68% African-American, maybe about 25% white. Very poor community and whatnot. So on a solution tip, you must, number one, have a police department that reflects the community that it serves.
Right.
That's the number one thing that you have to deal with, simply because during my 16-plus years, our department was majority black, just like the community, but typically the white officers that were hired that came on would go around and they would jump out on African-American young black youth that fit a certain profile, and they would do cavity searches and street searches and pat-downs, and it was always the same thing over the radio. I'll be out with a suspicious male black. What made the person suspicious was simply because they were black.
Right.
So they would jump out and search, and maybe for every 10 people to 20 people they searched, they would get a gun and drugs, and, you get all awards and everything. Everybody thought you was doing great, but you really didn't take into account the 17 or 18 people you jumped out there wasn't doing anything.
Well, and not only that, if you had searched every single white person, you actually would have found more drugs and guns.
Exactly. So that, to me, this is not a problem that you're going to be able to fix by just simply talking about it on the radio or even talking about it, period. First of all, you just got to acknowledge that it does exist, and not all white police officers are bad officers. The guys that I work with, I didn't think, there was only maybe 2 that I thought were prejudiced. The majority of them, they would just run around and they did what they did because they actually thought was the way you police.
Right.
They didn't understand that you were basically setting yourself and future white people up to have confrontations with blacks, because if you've been doing this to a certain group of people for years and years, young black men have developed to have an attitude against you because you're a white cop already, because the black man's thinking was, I haven't done nothing wrong, and here you are wanting to search me.
Right.
That's the attitude they had to
Dave,
come off the street with.
As a former police officer, would you agree with the statement that the job of a police officer should be to protect and serve his or her community, but increasingly the job that police are being given or are taking on all across the United States is to occupy and contain?
That's exactly correct. And the problem comes in is here. When you have black police officers dealing with black folks, things that we as black officers found, our interaction with them was we were more tolerant with a young black youth simply because we grew up just like they grew up, and we understand that you may have had a hatred for us because you had a bad experience. So we would give you a little leeway on, hey, man, come on, get out the street.
Right.
You don't want to get out the street? Well, me as a black officer, I would say, this is what really disturbs me about the Darren Wilson thing, is because we as officers are immune from having common sense. If that happened to a black officer in my community and you said, hey, man, get out the street, and the guy cursed you out and refused to do it, we as black officers would look at the kid and say, you know what? You're not leaving this community. I know you from the high school. You're going to need me one day when you're driving and you don't have your license with you, but you're valid. And I know you're valid because I ran your name, but you don't have your license with you. I think I'm going to lock you up today and write you some tickets. You're going to need me to be your friend one day, and I'll just deal with that. And the reason why you have to have common sense is because Darren Wilson is being immune from the fact of not having common sense, because we know these to be facts. Regardless of what anybody says about his hands being up or not, here's the facts we do know. We know that he rolled up and they was jaywalking or walking in the middle of the street. We know that because Michael Brown's friend said that. He admits to doing that.
Well, we also know that because that's one of the areas where Darren Wilson's testimony is the same as that of the witnesses who contradicted.
And now we also know that the officer didn't even know about the cigars simply because of this. Had he known about the cigars, he's already admitted that this guy is like 6'5", 290, and he's 6'4", about 220. Right. This guy's bigger than you. Every officer eyes the guy up and says, you know what? If I knew about a robbery, the first thing that I would do is I would call in backup. I wouldn't even exit my vehicle. He didn't call for backup. He only called in shots fired after he fired his gun.
Right.
But his first thought wasn't to say, hey, I'm down with a robbery suspect. Let me call in backup before I confront him. His was to say, get out of the roadway.
Well, and the sergeant who is his supervisor said in sworn statement under oath before a grand jury, in other words, he could be prosecuted if he lied about it. His sergeant, his supervisor, said, A, that Darren Wilson did not know that a robbery had happened, B, that he did not know that Michael Brown was the suspect in that robbery, and C, that Michael Brown had, Darren Wilson had explicitly told his supervisor, this sergeant, whose name I'm forgetting, I'm sorry, that Darren Wilson had explicitly told him after he shot Michael Brown that he had no idea that Michael Brown was the guy, that there was a robbery or that guy was a suspect in the robbery case.
Now follow me. Now follow me on this.
Okay.
We know that to be true. We know that to be true simply by those statements alone, because that would have been the first thing. When I heard about this incident and the chief came on, when the chief of police said he didn't know about the robbery, I said to myself, and I told my friends, that's a bad move on the chief. The officer might want to use that as an excuse later.
Yep.
Now he can't use that as an excuse.
Yep.
I'm thinking I'm back in uniform, and I wouldn't want my chief to say that, because now I'm going to have to say something to counter that. But here we go now is this. Here's the common sense part. You try to open the door. Let's assume Michael Brown did push the door back on you. And let's also assume that Michael Brown hit you. Common sense sets in and says, at 6'5", 290, you're looking at Michael Brown's friend saying, well, if it was Michael Brown's friend, I can easily get out and confront this guy and probably take him into custody without either one of us getting injured. But when you look at Michael Brown and he's 6'5", 292, as a police officer, I'm 6'2", 230. I'm not getting out on that guy because he's already demonstrated to me by either saying I'm not getting out the road, pushing my door shut, and punching me in my face. He's already demonstrated to me that it's going to be a physical confrontation. I'm 6'2" and 230. If this guy is 6'5" and 292, the only way I'm going to be IOD, which is injured on duty, or the only way I'm not going home. I'm going home to my family, my wife and kids. So either I'm going to have to whoop this guy or I'm going to have to kill this guy. But I'm not going to let it go down with me. So my common sense tells me, why am I interacting with this guy to begin with for walking down the center of the street? Is it worth killing him or getting myself injured? Is it worth it? Common sense tells me this isn't worth it.
Right. And once he's already in, my take on what happened was that, he came up, he told the kids to get the F off the street. Their response was basically back in your face. And at that point, he could have driven off. He could have called for help. But I think he got PO'd. I think he got angry. And I think Michael Brown at that point was angry. And you had, testosterone. You had two angry, large men going at each other. But one of them happened to have a gun. And so the other one ended up dead. That's the predictable part. Am I making sense, Dave?
My experience would tell me that that's exactly what happened. But what he could have did was say what all police officers do. I'm going to inconvenience you today. Let me call from backup over here because you are 6'5" and 290. Obviously, I don't want to kill a guy, and he's big enough that I'm going to have to pull out my gun if it gets to that point and gets physical. So let me call from backup. I'll put you on the ground. We'll search you, run your names.
Right.
Real big inconvenience. You come back, you don't have no warrant. You can search on your way. You got to.
There you go. I'm with you, Dave. I'm sorry we're out of time, but you're absolutely right. Thank you for the call.